Hey, Leah. One other thing, can you put on your list, would you ask the facilities people to put a battery in that clock? I didn't see the time. It's so big. It's like, whoa. But I know it's on our computers and stuff, but.
Like, out on it for a minute, talk about how important it is, but also that the housing element's not making those decisions, you know, those comments. Yeah. That's a presentation, it's going on.
Good. Is it still morning? Good morning. We are starting the second part of our meeting today, which will be the planning commission part and the housing element of that part. Is everybody? Go right from the top. All right, here we are. Special meeting on March 4th, 2025. Okay, well, who hasn't done it yet over there? Jill? You're up, ma'am.
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll start out with county matters. These items include non-routine or controversial matters and are listed alphabetically by department. A member of the board, staff, or public may request that an item be heard out of order. Does anybody want to hear anything out of order? Since there's only one, it'd be pretty hard to do, huh? All right. A1, community development planning. Conduct a workshop to review the housing element before submission to the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, no fiscal impact.
Chair, if I may. My name is Ed Presley. I'm the Planning Director and the Deputy Director of Community Development Department. And I appreciate your flexibility. I know we had to cancel this meeting before. So for the public, we're going to be going over the housing element that is about to be presented to HCD. We do have Planning Commissioner Carol Fall here, and there should be at least one more on the way, hopefully, that could make it today. And I would like to introduce Ryan Lester. He is from Mentor Harnish, and he will be presenting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
All right, thank you for having me today. I believe I have a PowerPoint ready. All right, so thank you for having me today to talk about the county's housing element. We'll just start with a quick agenda of what we'll talk about today, and then we'll jump right in. Oh. Thank you. All right, so here's our agenda for today. I'll give a quick reminder about the contents of a housing element, what's in there and why, and how it relates to our discussion today. And then I'll do a summary discussion of the housing element programs. These are the implementation measures included in the draft housing element. And then we'll talk about the public comments as well as the comments from the state that we've received so far. And we'll kind of go through those because those will lead to revisions before we submit to the state in the next round. So just to start, let's give a refresher on what's in the housing element. It's a big, long document. It's almost 300 pages. It's very long. I apologize. Just so you know, everything that's in there is a required analysis by the state. So, you know, we're not throwing extra content at you for no reason. We start off the housing element with the introduction. This really sets up what we've done with our engagement strategy, the comments that we've heard, and really shows that the county did its due diligence in engaging the community to inform the plan. So the introduction really goes through each of our engagement efforts. We had a project website, we did workshops, study sessions, opinion surveys online, and then even an extended public review period for the draft itself. So there was a considerable amount of engagement that went into the draft document. The next big section is the housing needs assessment. This is the data evaluation and analysis, looking at existing housing needs and then projected needs through 2029 is when we're planning for. So that section really is just looking at data and analyzing to try to get an understanding of the housing needs in the community. Then there's a constraints analysis. This is where we look at governmental and non-governmental constraints or barriers to housing. We want to just be upfront about them, talk about them, and then start to plan to overcome them. And so the constraints analysis goes into governmental constraints. So you have to go through your zoning code and look for issues that might hold up approvals, and then talk about non-governmental constraints. So, you know, really common non-governmental constraints in California are the high cost of land and the high cost of construction, right? And so we need to discuss those and then start to, in the actual programs, have some programs that work to chip away at those constraints. The next section is called the housing sites inventory. This is a zoning exercise where the state has given the county a housing goal to meet. It's called the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And the county has to prove that they have enough land zoned to meet that need. It really is a zoning exercise. I will say that for an urban jurisdiction like in the Bay Area, they get a really high number for their housing need that they have to hit, and they have to find a lot of vacant land that's zoned for multifamily. With the county, the RHNA was really, really low. It's a state requirement. The RHNA was 2 units. So we just had to show that the county had enough land zoned for multifamily just to meet that need. So there's not a big rezoning process. We're not involving, underutilized sites or anything like that. We're just pointing out the vacant land that's available, that's already zoned and ready for development. And then just as an extra point, the last bullet there is that affordable housing needs to be supported by programs in the document. So we're connecting to some sites that we feel are feasible for affordable housing development or for multifamily development. And then we have to support that with the implementation programs. And then the last section here is called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. It's a mouthful. That is the brand new fair housing analysis that needs to be included. So the state identifies a number of topics. They give you the data and then they say, okay, for your jurisdiction, go through the data and tell me what you see, right? So it's looking at maps of, which census tracts have higher incomes, which census tracts have lower incomes, things like that. Trying to figure out where there are differences within the jurisdiction, within the county, what differences are felt by folks. And then, of course, the policy document needs to address some of those issues, right? So part of that fair housing analysis is not just going through the data, but then having some conclusions, right? Saying, displacement risk is a fair housing issue in the county. The high cost of insurance is actually displacement pressure, right? And so starting to identify some of those things and then put in meaningful actions in the policy document to start to overcome some of those issues. So that's why those sections are built into the housing element and what really their purpose is for. They're really all supposed to just inform the policy document, which is what we'll be talking about today. So then after those sections, you have your policy document. This is your action plan. So these are your goals, policies, and most importantly, your implementation programs. How are we going to work to meet the needs of the county? How are we going to work to overcome constraints and fair housing issues, right? The policy document has a number of requirements that have been state law for quite a while. So jurisdictions have to support development, rehabilitation, preservation of affordable housing. So those have to be included, as well as all the fair housing actions based on the analysis. There's a lot of new requirements for how programs are written now. So if you've read the housing element, the programs are a lot longer in this cycle than they were 5 years ago, because the state wants us to add all these little strategies. So housing mobility strategies are ways to get more affordable units into higher income areas, right? Place-based strategies are really, where are there issues and targeting those areas for some improvements or some funding or some rehabilitation, right? So maybe there's a community with higher need for rehabilitation, right? Targeted community engagement has to be included in all the programs now. Not every single program, but you have to show that your action plan has engagement that's targeted to different areas, different communities, and is multilingual as well. And then anti-displacement efforts. These can sometimes be hard for jurisdictions, but they have to be included by state law and by HCD's interpretation of state law. So with that, I'll kind of discuss what we included in the draft, in the initial draft. Our programs, we have more than 24 programs, I believe, or about 24 programs. But I've kind of organized them here so you can see why they're there. So there's a number of programs that just deal with constraints or generally deal with constraints. The one that I really want to highlight here is the water and sewer service capacity. So this commits the county to engaging, supporting the districts, and then seeking funding to assist in improvement projects or whatever the need may be. So those are programs that are built to address constraints. The housing information transparency one is a state law requirement. That's just to get all the information about your zoning and everything else online and to keep it updated throughout the planning period. The next batch of programs are really, they really work to address housing needs and then housing sites. So a couple that I want to point out here are low and moderate income rental housing program. This is just to encourage development, to assist and to incentivize, lower income affordable housing. So this could be support for the housing choice voucher program, right? Another one is the home ownership program. So seeking funding to provide assistance, maybe it's down payment assistance for low or moderate income households that want to buy a home, or maybe it's a first-time home buyer program. You'll notice that a lot of these programs that I'll speak to today are about, we've identified the need, but we haven't identified the funds yet. So the program itself becomes, we're going to annually seek funding to try to do this, right? So the program actually commits the county to every year looking at what grant funding is out there and seeing if it's possible to pursue some, secure some, and then start that program. So that's a strategy that a lot of jurisdictions have to rely on when they don't have excess funds.
Sure, I just have a question.
You're good.
So I'm trying to make sure I understand the process that we're going to move through today. So you've already covered a couple things that I'll have questions on.
Sure.
But I don't know if you're going to be doing a deeper dive on all these points you're highlighting now. So I don't know when to jump in. So
Yeah.
can you just give me an idea of how what we're gonna go through and how and when?
So so I figured I would give like a high level just
Okay.
discussion of the programs, and then we'd run through the actual public comments in a little more detail. If you have questions about these programs, we can talk about them now.
Okay, you're not gonna go into more
so,
detail on each
no,
of these
no.
specifically, so,
Right.
okay.
Maybe we should go with, you had 5 kind of highlighted topics on that first page there.
Sure.
When we get through, we'll go back one more, I think. One more.
Oh,
This was it.
yeah, I think that was the first one on programs. So that was from the initial section.
Yeah, the rest was more just process. This
Yeah.
is more.
Okay, so I do have a question, Chair.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think we should stop after each one's, do a round of
Sure.
public comment and board or staff comment.
Okay.
So when you get to a ending point, let us know, we'll begin.
Okay. So this slide, please.
So the item 3, water and sewer service capacity. I know I've heard in this boardroom and separately, a number of situations in which small communities are really struggling with the water service. They're just so small, they can't afford the money that comes in. And I see this about engage, support, seek funding to assist. And that's the sound I was getting with the mic above him. It was a ceiling mic that, I don't know why that's so bad, but that's what I heard too. So
Leah,
anyway,
1 moment, sorry, Supervisor Leo, in the past, there have been incidences where this mic caused that problem, so feel free to shut mine off as a trial if needed.
so I just wanted better clarification about what does engage, support, and seek funding to assist local water and sewer providers really look like? Because I'm sure there's a lot of local providers out there that would love to know what this is really going to mean.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, if you want me to get into specifics, there's like 7 actions or so in that program. But generally, it's providing technical assistance to the district in identifying any service deficiencies or issues, right? Calling them every year to coordinate with them on what their needs are, right? And then to discuss those needs, to discuss, hey, are there any grant opportunities out there that we can create a partnership towards? And then going to pursue that grant funding, right? There are a number of other actions that are a little more process-based. So requiring providers to provide up-to-date service area maps and documents identifying currently constrained parcels, working with providers to establish a process for timely and accurate review of development applications. Let's see, annually engaging providers to identify and secure additional funding.
I'm sorry, what page are you, would I be
I'm
looking to
on
for detail?
8-128. It's program HE3.
Anybody have any idea where that is on the documents we've been provided?
You just go by the page number.
Well, I don't see those in the digital. I see page 6. I don't see HE such and such. Maybe I'm not looking at all the documentation.
I too am having trouble following through, so I printed the housing element and hoping that, I know you hate paper. But need a little guidance to make sure that we can follow you. And so when you say it's on 123,
Let's see, so it's program HE3 on page 8-128.
128.
Yeah, all the programs are lumped in one section, starting on 8-127, and they go in numerical order. So if you find that section,
Got it.
that's where we'll be.
Okay. That probably doesn't help Supervisor Lutweiler, but it helped me.
Page 130.
On the actual plan itself, Rick, not the agenda, the comments and all that stuff, but you'd have to go to the Trinity 2050 website. And if you download the actual plan itself, that would be the same page numbers that are being referenced.
Thank you.
Sure.
Carol, go ahead.
I just want to clarify first. So the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, the RHNA, is only for affordable housing, how the state defines affordable housing, not necessarily what we would just normally consider affordable housing.
Right, right. So in order to, like if an apartment building was built and you wanted to take credit for that towards it, In order for it to meet the affordable housing goals, it would need to be like a deed restricted or a rent restricted a unit that actually caps the cost of it at what's affordable for a lower income household.
Because kind of related to Rick's question, one of the questions that came up in my district was, why we couldn't consider properties that were served by septic tanks towards the RHNA. And so you're saying it's only if they officially have a water and sewer capacity, some sort of governmental entity that's providing sewer service or something?
Well, yeah, so that's a great question because it is a complicated issue. How the state has done it is they've come up with some requirements based on discussions that they've had with affordable housing developers saying, hey, what are the issues, right? What are those costly issues that really make a parcel not work out for you, right? So they want parcels between certain sizes. Once they're too big, you have to install too many new offsite improvements and things like that. And then the cost of water and sewer, installing your own, can be a constraint for affordable housing developers.
But if we only need 2 in Trinity County, potentially you could build a duplex that's served by a septic tank and meet the RHNA. It's just the state criteria that doesn't let you do that?
Yeah, so there's actually 2 processes here. There's the zoning exercise that we're undertaking with this plan, where we have to identify zones that are already ready for that. And there's a certain density limit that we have to hit. So it has to be really high density vacant parcels, basically. That's the capacity analysis that we're doing to actually meet the RENA through actual production. It could come from a site like that, right? You can develop affordable duplex like that on a single family parcel, right? The state doesn't want us counting that in advance, right? They have certain requirements for what you're going to count based on your zoning in that capacity analysis that we're undertaking, right?
I mean, can we get a waiver or something that would let us, build a duplex that's served by septic tanks and count that? I mean.
Yes, you absolutely could count that towards your production goals, right? So before the planning period starts, we do this exercise, which is looking at your zoning and making sure there's enough capacity out there based on the state requirements. And then for the next 5 years, the county has to actually show that, okay, well, here's the applications we received and here's the ones we approved, and were they affordable or not? And then try to meet that same RENA goal through actual production, right? So there's 2 processes happening here. There's the zoning exercise, which we're doing in the housing element, and then there's actually, did we meet it through real production, right? If someone develops any unit and they rent it out for $600 a month, whether it's owned by the government or not, that is actually an affordable unit, and you could take credit for lower income actual production based on that unit, because $600 is affordable to a lower income household in the county.
But only if it's on a sewer system.
No. The requirements that it be within a water and sewer district are just for this zoning analysis. HCD doesn't want you pointing to a bunch of parcels that'll be really expensive and saying, no, we did it. We did our job, right? We zoned for it. But if they're not in sewer districts, they're not connected to anything, and there's going to be extra costs, the likelihood of that actually being developed for affordable housing goes down. So HCD doesn't want to see those sites. So that's why they put certain requirements on the exercise that we're talking about today, just because in their mind, those are the most feasible sites for affordable housing development, and they want to make sure that it meets some of their requirements. I know that's really in the weeds, and I'm sorry.
Not really, though. I appreciate that. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks. Oh, sorry.
So this did keep coming up in Trinity Center. So we have parcels that are zoned commercial that have community water system, but they're on septic tanks. So we're trying to figure out why we couldn't kind of apply for grants and get money to, have affordable housing there.
You certainly
Even though
can. You
they're already on
absolutely can.
septic tanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Anyway.
absolutely can, and actually the policy document does include some targeted programs to look for areas that have a greater need, right? The sites inventory to meet the arena, it really is just a zoning analysis to make sure that we've provided enough multifamily zoned parcels, right? There are a lot of jurisdictions that are literally just single family everywhere and they try to turn it in and the state goes, no, you can't do that. You don't have any higher density areas.
Mhm.
Single family is really low feasibility for affordable housing. But it does not, what is included in the sites inventory, it's not the entirety of development that can happen in the county. It does not mean that development can't happen on other parcels. It totally can. The county can continue doing what it does. What this is showing that the county has jumped through all the right hoops with the state, and the county is not being a constraint by only having single family zones, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say the way I'm interpreting what I'm hearing is this checks a box that we have to check. It isn't a, let's plan for the county where all we could do this. It's, let's show that we can do it where we have to do it. So let us go forward. Is that?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct. Yeah.
So I think if we want to go further, we have to have that conversation as a separate thing.
Yeah.
So I'd like to come back to my question now that I've found the right document. I didn't see that in our backup material, so I was looking at those. But I see here, as a subpoint to what I see on this slide, that we will annually engage water and wastewater providers to identify and secure additional funding to support priority projects with a goal of securing 300,000 in the planning period.
Mhm.
So I would like to know, is this another check the box? This is what we say we're going to do, but do we really have a plan to do this? Because again, I know that in the just 2 years I've been here, and I'm sure that's been brought up many times before, there are water systems out there absolutely failing and they can't get the money. And as far as I know, we aren't jumping in to help them with finding that funding for them, but this says we will. So I
Right,
want to
so-
make sure I'm clear.
Yeah. So one of the big pushes by the state in this round is they want to see a lot of details on what you're going to do, right? So in the past at Housing Element, there was a similar program to this. This is just a modified version, right? But we've had to add some specifics about what you will do, right? And so one of those things that we can add that's fairly low cost is, hey, we're going to call up all the districts every year. We're going to call them up, ask them what their problems are, explore with them if there's any grant funding that we can go after together. If not, we implemented our program in the state size, right? But we want an actual goal, right? So I did try to put a funding goal, like what, just to have a metric to reach for. And the state really requires that. So, like that $300,000, you may say, oh, that's not nearly enough. We need a higher goal, or that's too much. We need a lower goal. But the state really wants us to, okay, what are you going to do? You're going to engage them. You're going to look for funding. How much funding are you going to look for? It's the first question that they ask. So we do have to kind of put they call it a metric, some kind of something to reach towards. But you'll notice that the program language doesn't say we will give them $300,000, right? Or we're committing $300,000, or we will get this funding. The goal and the intent of this is we're going to call them up. We're going to talk to them about their needs. We're going to do it on a regular basis, and then we'll see if there's any opportunities for us to go get more money.
Okay. I think maybe this will be a different discussion at some time, but I am starting to see this as a process that we must go through and boxes we must check, and not a true, this is how we're going to make things better in our community by the criteria that's in this plan. Because this, to me, should be in our strategic plan. If we say, hey, it's important enough, we need to go help solve these water service problems throughout the county, and somehow we're going to have to go, like we were talking about, hire a grant writer that's going to work with all these locals, and we're going to do matching funds because it's that important and so forth. But what I'm seeing here is, well, if we say this, HUD will, the group will, HCD will leave us alone. But I don't know that I see us saying, we're committed to this. This is how we're going to fix the problem. So that's just my feeling that I have at the moment. And I know what we're here to accomplish, which is complete this document, get it submitted, and we're already past due. So I don't want to be
No, it's good.
Chief
It's a good
Government.
conversation. I think it's twofold. One, I think there is a lot of this that is absolutely check the box. And that's unless there is time, energy, and effort put towards going and fighting HCD, it's futile to even try that fight.
Right.
So let's not do that.
Yeah.
That's why we've hired, a consultant expert to guide us through the check the box piece of it. And that is some of this stuff. But I also think there is an aspect of this that we can look at implementing and that could be used to then further our strategic goals looking forward. I'm sure I might want to speak for Bella and Ed, but we've had these discussions as far as there are way too many implementation programs that we cannot do them all.
Okay.
We don't have the people, we don't have the funding to do all these.
Okay.
So we would then need to prioritize some of those. And all of these that you're seeing now may not be the ones that are actually, implemented when we go to actually adopt this thing. If there's some, today that people think, hey, let's not submit that one, okay? When we can maybe have that discussion.
Mhm.
Or when we get comments back, the formal comments back from HCD and we go to formalize this, maybe we eliminate some of them that we know were kind of really, really stretch goals, but we still meet the minimum requirements, but we adjust them somewhat. So that's part of this discussion. We can have that and get feedback. But, some of these are acknowledged that we currently don't have the resources to do this. But if we have those discussions and we do prioritize and we do come across more funding, these are the types of things we would like to do as a county to go after some of these programs from an infrastructure perspective.
Okay. And thank you. And I think, so then to internalize this, I'm thinking this should be looked at as, have we got the right things on here from which, if we, to the extent we have bandwidth, people, money, anything else, these are the things that we should do. And then we need to have, I think, a separate conversation that is, what are we absolutely committed to do as part of addressing this as part of our strategic plan or whatever? Because people say to me, what are we doing with economic development? I said, well, until we fix housing, we can't really fix economic development. So housing to me is one of our most important. And this to me lays a very broad-based, here's the assessment, we're meeting all the requirements, here's the things we could and should do. But it isn't us saying, and here's the 7 things that are most important for us to do in the next 12 months to try to move the needle on housing. And I'm quickly gathering that's not the subject we're here for. This is the big picture, meet your commitments. You're not just checking boxes, because it is trying to say, what do we really need to accomplish here? But we're also not saying this is everything we're going to do.
I would concur with that
Okay.
this is not going to solve the individual stories with people struggling with, quote, housing in Trinity County. It will lay a framework for maybe developing a, multi-year plan to start getting at some of those issues. I think once we've had this document finalized, then we could carve out certain items that could develop, okay, in the next 12 months, what are some things that we can really focus on and maybe have an impact on, an individual coming into Trinity County that has more opportunities for either low-income housing, housing, or single-family housing. What we can do from this document, but this document itself is not going to set those type of priorities that you're talking about.
I was just wondering, based on this conversation, so, we were talking about this grant one specifically, and you specifically referenced districts. So we do have very clearly recognized districts, but we also have many, many, many small water companies in our area. And so maybe providing some clarity there on what the target is. But the bigger question is, how much of this is actually required in the state's language to say that, yes, this you need to go find grants and support these small entities, versus like this was an item that was identified as feel good and should be included. But as we're discussing, there may not be actual capacity. So in this document, how much do you see is based clearly on the requirements from the state versus outside? These are other examples that other places are using and would support these programs.
Okay, that's a great question. I'll do my best to answer it. So There are a lot of required programs, one of which, or multiple of which, being addressing constraints. So the fact that there's so many water and sewer districts and companies and some people on septic, that actually is a constraint to affordable housing just because of increased cost, assumed increased cost by the state. So their requirement for this is, well, that's a constraint. You need to address it in your plan. You need to have specific actions, and those actions need to be matched with a metric goal, right? And so the action that we crafted for that was, okay, well, we'll engage the service providers or the companies, right, the districts, and we'll talk to them about what their needs are, and then we'll go and try to get funding together, right? The state didn't tell us specifically you need to include that action, but they're telling us you have to address constraints, you have to have engagement involved, and you have to have some actions that set metrics that work to chip away at that constraint, right? So generally, the programs that we include, like if you just look at the program name, like those things are basically required. But all the bullets under that, we can change that. That is me and staff trying to come up with the best thing that we can do without overburdening the county with so many things that then the state will just hold you to. Because anything you do put in this housing element, the state can hold you to, and they can review it and tear it apart and give you comments on it, and you have to change it and address them. So while we are injecting it with as much unique perspective based on Trinity County and what's unique to Trinity County, there are also a number of requirements that we just also have to work towards meeting and writing unique actions for.
If I may add, I just want to add from staff's perspective to kind of show you guys what we've been doing. So Cody, Christy, and I reviewed this entire document, but Cody and I, the building official, went through the hundreds of sites that were submitted from public comment and from internal discussions that could be favorable for development, for housing development. And we went through that hours on end and pared it down. So what I'm trying to say is I hope that the contents of this document, while it is a largely templated document that has to meet state requirements, I also hope it's going to lay the blueprints for real development. Like that's the intent that we went into this with. It wasn't just a paper exercise.
Thank you.
We tried to set up, like I'm proud of the efforts that went into this. This is eons better and more applicable than our last housing element. And so for these sites, we pared it down to a manageable number that then you could take that, or whoever can take that to a developer, and they can sort through each of these sites and not just take the thousands that we have in Trinity County and somehow pare it down. So that was our goal. And then I just wanted to add kind of on our previous discussions that I asked Ryan, I don't know, maybe 5 times how many of these implementation measures we can cut out just for the realistic endeavors that we have and the realistic staff numbers. So he cut out as much as he could. That's the, it's important to go through the ones we definitely have questions with. But I just wanted to point that out. And I wanted to also point out that the implementation programs, like the implementation programs you've seen in our draft general plan update, is like that's what is going to, amongst other things, prioritize work in different divisions. So look at those. If you have a minimal amount of time, I just want to throw out the tip of look at the implementation programs. Like the documents are hundreds of pages long, and I get that. Like we get to review that during our work time. But if you have I just wanted to throw that tip out there because that's the work that's actually going to be done. And we try to go through it in a realistic manner. But we did have to put on some rose-colored glasses of like, it will get better. We will have more money. We will have more people to try to meet what the state wants us to meet.
And how do those rose-colored glass outcomes get walked out at such a point that Ryan said at some point the state could say, we're pinning you down to this one. There is a must do. And I guess specifically, I'm wondering like when the bullet point Supervisor Lutweiler brought up this goal of securing 300,000 annual, this wastewater provider point. Where'd you get that number? What, meeting that, how hard would that be if it were pulled out and, can it be lower? Why is it selected?
That number could be lower, it could be higher. Part of it is me trying to set a talking point for us to start that conversation with you
Okay.
and then meeting with you here today. And because you may all come back and say, we need way more money than that. And I think it's out there. I think we should get it, right? What I don't want to do is set such a high goal that then you'll never meet it. Everyone will just be frustrated. It'll never get even implemented or try to implement it, right? We want to set a goal that we think is realistic. I don't specifically know how much grant funding is out there for upgrading water and sewer systems, but I'm sure it's not as much as you need, right? So we're just trying to find that balancing act for setting a goal that we think is substantial enough to work towards, but not so substantial that it's a constraint itself.
And so now I'm feeling a burden I don't personally feel equal to when your statement says, well, that's a starting point for discussion. We can talk about it, we can change it, and we have to finalize this. How are we supposed to do that? I don't feel empowered.
Well, so we work with staff behind the scenes to try to draft it as best as we feel appropriate, right? And then we put it out for public comment. We actually left the document up for 2 months for public comment. We sent it out to agencies and districts, right? And so looking for comment from anybody who has it. We've done our best to come up with a realistic number, but if we got a comment from somebody that says, actually, this is a better number, and we would talk about it and consider it. My initial program writing comes from my experience and what I've seen from other jurisdictions. So, trying to be lockstep in that and not, expanded way beyond or way below, we're doing the best we can to set a metric or a goal. When you go to implement that program and you make that call every year and you discuss it with the districts, there may be a $1 million grant. You may get it in the first year and blow that goal out of the water, right? Or it may come in year 8. Or maybe you find a grant for $100,000, right? Those things will be implemented based on what's actually out there, and you have no control over that. So we use very specific language so that it's not guaranteeing the county will give $300,000, right? It's guaranteeing the county will do its due diligence to look for grant funding out there, to speak with the districts and to understand their needs and their constraints, right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I
And-
know. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Supervisor
I'm
Brownfield.
sorry. So in our areas out southern Trinity, to Carol's point, and to Bella's point, are we looking at affordable housing out in the bigger acreages and the bigger, being able to do duplexes or ADUs to rent or second, right? I don't see a lot of that. So how do we go about the septic systems and all of that? I mean, they're so different from the urban areas here, our needs, but we do need affordable housing in those areas.
Certainly. And so any programs that are working to encourage and incentivize affordable housing can be applied to those areas or to whatever areas the county sees fit to do so. A lot of jurisdictions do affordable housing incentives jurisdiction-wide. Maybe you want to really encourage it in certain areas. And so you say, a few extra incentives for this area because we really need lower income housing there. That's totally appropriate to do. I'm not trying to dictate all of that in the programs word for word. That is for the county to decide as they go to implement.
County level, okay.
I would just,
Go ahead.
Jen. I would just add that in this exercise, we looked at, like he said, the major areas that have major services available.
Okay.
But the county currently right now, like we encourage ADUs
Right.
internally with our review and externally and trying to, educate people on what they're able to do. And there's also a program in here that it continues that work. And I just want to add one thing onto what Jill was saying before, is that we need your help prioritizing these. We need your help prioritizing the resources to make this happen. Right now, realistically, I think we could do 3 of these programs. And the state will fine us if we can't do it. So I'm not trying to scare you, but it's scarier for us not to turn in this document. And it's, we need to be thinking long-term with these things. And when we do I don't want to talk too much, but we need help to do this. This is what the state wants us to do, but we need help to make it a reality once the implementation time comes into play. And all of these are at different times. There's different time frames set up for all the programs.
So it almost seems like it would be helpful to me if we had a sub-strategic plan that then dovetailed into the one that we do have. I need to be able to see it on paper in a way that I can keep top of mind. I can read through this and I've got 1,000 little questions here that I can't even remember unless I go back and look at sticky tabs. So to have something that we're actually responsible to the state for and can be fined for not implementing, what is the means by which we are going to put those into bullet points that we make sure we achieve?
Yeah, so from my experience, and we've worked with a couple jurisdictions in actually implementing their housing element, once you get the document approved, you take your programs, you figure out, okay, well, which departments are, going to implement which programs, how much can they handle? What are the time frames that we expected, and what funding is out there to implement this? And so most jurisdictions annually have to have that conversation again, right? We have these programs still, we have this much time, we have this much funding. Which ones can we really target? Some jurisdictions can target all of them. They spread, we've tried to spread out the programs as much as we can. We're on a 5-year time frame. It's pretty quick. That's like the first step in actually beginning implementation, right? So we have all these requirements, we have all these fairly broad programs, right? So starting up a home ownership assistance program, right? Maybe one year there's actually a grant. You got a grant the previous year, and so that year that jumps up to the top of your implementation priorities, right? What happens as far as reporting to the state, every year the planning staff has to actually go through the programs and say what they did to work towards that program every year, right? And the state actually reviews that. So in the last housing element period, most of those responses were, we didn't have staff time or funding to implement this, and it was not implemented, right? Literally, that was the response, because there just wasn't staff time and funding to implement the state's requirements, right? The state did take notice, and they pushed us a little bit on this housing element to have some even more specifics to try to implement it. And we haven't talked about it yet, but one of their comments was, okay, you need a program that's just, how are we going to start implementing this? Because so many of the responses last time were we couldn't. Right? And so we're going to have to actually add a program in that says, hey, annually we'll meet and have those discussions. We'll talk about funding. We'll talk about how much staff time's available. We'll talk about which divisions or departments are going to handle it. And then we'll make some priorities, right? That's probably what that program will look like.
Just as a couple examples, since they were brought up. So on ADUs, if you look at program HE6 there, which is on 8-130 as far as the page numbers. It's pretty generic, it's pretty broad, but it says, encourage the development of 30 ADUs in higher resource areas in the planning period. So encourage the development of 30 ADUs, that is an achievable goal. We can encourage that development. Now, is that a specific implementation plan as far as what we're going to do with ADUs? But like Bella said, we have been favorable to ADUs. We're encouraging that. And if you look up in the contents of that, some potential incentives are, it says maybe, but are not limited to, reduce setbacks and parking requirements. That is something within our immediate control. It's not a mandate that's driven down to us by the state. So we do have some control over that. Expedited permitting process, those are things within our control. The allowable lot coverage, we do have local control over that type of land use. And then if you look down on the home ownership item, we have through RCRC, there is a home ownership program. We have had 3 staff since I've been here in the county that have taken advantage of that. So we will take credit for that, for this type of program. This doesn't mean we have to establish our own internally funded, county-driven home ownership program where we're going out and helping people find financing and doing all the things a traditional private entity would do. So there are things out there that are happening that we can take credit for. And those are just like two pretty easy examples of them.
So I have a couple of follow-up comments. First of all, I especially appreciate, well, that, because you're giving some real examples, and Bella, your comments too, because two things really stood out to me. One, from someone who lives and breathes these documents, you're saying this is way, way better than we've had before. Two, I heard we really were trying to look for the things that we really need to do, not just how do we get HCD off our back, which makes me feel better, both in our investment of time and a heck of a lot of time and money on your part. And I just think what you're referring to, Ryan, I think is we just need to, it sounds like here, we need to make sure we're not overcommitting, but I'm also seeing that, as been pointed out, a lot of these are assist with, try with, have a goal of, so we're not setting ourselves up for failure that could lead to fines, but we also are putting a lot of things out here that we know without a lot of additional resources, we could never reach all those goals. But we can at least have this plan that guides our efforts and we can try to do things. And then to me, it's a whole nother step if we decide to do that, to dig in deeper and say, this is one of our number one priorities. We really have to figure out how do we make some of this happen and provide the support financially, resources wise, whatever else, to really make more of these dreams come true instead of just being the loose outline.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, it's easier to have that discussion like January 1st, you have a meeting internally with just the county and say, hey, we have this much funding. What do we want to do with it? If you do that discussion in here, you'll be held to it, even if things change, right?
Yeah.
So it is good to have those conversations over
helpful.
here.
And then just follow up on here because we hit the accessory dwelling units and I see a couple things here I'm really glad to see that we're doing. I have read and heard, and I just want to get an updated view, is that by definition, what the state considers an ADU, they cannot be used for vacation rentals.
Yeah, please, if you.
Yeah, it's in state code that they cannot be, and I reached out to HCD when this question came up, maybe like 8 months ago, and got a assistant response back, or technical response back, that they gave me the section in state code that you can't have ADUs as short-term rentals, and I believe that's 30 days or less.
Okay.
But I can send you that.
Yeah, yeah, that's what, thank you. That's what I thought. And so I just think at some point, we're going to need to address that internally. And I see a lot of this refers to address this within the time frame of the 2026 general plan and so on and so forth. So we have some time within what we're committing to here, but I also think we need to recognize and address that.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Me too. But Cody and I talked about that whenever we discover anything that's off, we try to make a plan immediately on how to, correct it going forward. So we talked internally and he asked, at least, that's the conversation we had. I don't want to speak for him, but to ask, is this being used for a short-term rental or not? So right up front, whether you know or not, now you know, and it can't be used for that purpose, right? Because it's not meant to, ADUs are supposed to help the housing stock,
Right.
And short-term rentals do not do such a thing.
And it's not that people can't have additional housing on their property, but to be able to work within the privileges and
Yes.
limited constraints and everything of a quote ADU
Advantages
with
of
streamline and everything else, it
Yep.
can't be then for that purpose, which I think we all know that is being done right now, and we'll just have to deal with that as we go. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to hit on this before I let us move off slide one, is something that's come up multiple times, and I think especially up in the North Lake area, but probably all over the county, is that we have limited housing for lots of different reasons, including fires and everything else. But one of the biggest limitations for available housing for people who live and work here is that we have a lot of second homes that either sit empty or are vacation rental. Is there anything in anything we've done here that says here in this or in our general plan work, we should consider something that incentivizes, disincentivizes, limits, restricts anything associated with that?
I believe, I'm
think
just
it's
trying to remind myself.
HE 19.
Right.
And while you're looking, the things I've heard from other counties are examples of have a higher tax rate for a home that is not a permanent occupied residence unless it is rented to someone who lives and works in the county. And so they basically say, hey, maybe we're gonna 50% increase in your property taxes unless you're renting it back to someone. And so then it's not to say you can't have a second home. I have to be clear, I had a vacation home here for 15 years before I moved here. And so I understand why people want them. I wanted it. But at the point at which we can't put people in houses and we can't hire people because they don't have a place to live or it's not affordable, then counties were looking at different ways to address that problem. And this was just one example I heard of. We'll raise the bar. It may not stop them, but it'll give us some more money that maybe we can use to help with other things. And then there were others that just went on full-on restrictions. It's like, no, we've reached a limit. We can only have X% of second homes in our county or our jurisdiction and so forth. So I'm not looking for a policy. I'm just wondering if we've addressed it at all.
Yeah, so we discuss it as part of our displacement strategy. So there's an anti-displacement program. And it's program 22. What that program does is say that the county will adopt a multifaceted strategy for dealing with displacement. It doesn't actually.
And that's how you refer to displacement.
I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to figure out how did that, I don't know the term. So how does that relate to displacement?
I'm getting there. So
Okay.
as part of within programs where we're not establishing it for you, we're giving you kind of a menu of options to consider, right? One of the options to consider as part of a affordable housing preservation is for the county to consider restricting conversion of existing units to short-term rentals, right? So we have included it there as as you're coming up with this plan, you should be thinking about that. That is one way to preserve existing housing units and to work to decrease displacement pressures, right? Is restricting short-term rentals. I haven't decided that for you in the program. I've listed it as one of the things the county will consider in creating their strategy, right? So that is something you could do it like you're saying. You could do it jurisdiction-wide. You could do it based on, once we approve this many, then no more. You could do it to targeted areas. So there may be some areas with a lot of vacation homes and second rentals. And so maybe you, as part of that strategy, have a targeted, kind of rule for that area, right? As part of your ordinance where you're really trying to restrict them by a targeted geography.
So that is a problem in the Trinity Center area where only 30% of the homes are occupied by permanent residents. You point that out in the plan. And it's not just vacation and seasonal homes. It's actually homes that are unoccupied for years.
Okay.
So how would you deal with that? I mean, they're not renting them out. No one lives there for years.
Right. Are they in need of rehabilitation or they're just
Nope.
completely empty? Unfortunately, the housing element can't really speak to that.
I understand though that is it San Francisco? If your home is not occupied for a certain length of time, then they do have some remedial action. You have to show that someone lives there.
Mhm.
So is there some possibility to
That is-
explore something like that?
That is something that county can definitely explore if you have the appetite for doing something like that. Absolutely.
And is it fair to say, though, that what you're saying is within our overall housing element and perhaps within HE 22, we've set the stage for addressing something like that?
Yes.
But that would come with, Ed and Bella's help in our zoning and so forth and ordinances that are still to come as part of the general plan. Am I
Yeah.
right? And so we don't have to, we don't need to, we're not boxing ourselves into something specific here, but we have at least acknowledged it as a factor in this section.
Correct.
All right, I just want to make sure we're not missing and hopefully, there's a lot of dots being connected across the way, which you guys understand more painfully than we do, but okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
These are all great questions. I'm sorry that this is so in the weeds. I really appreciate your patience with us.
Well, I think we're dragging you to the weeds, so don't feel bad.
So the next group of programs are all to address housing needs or to incentivize development on those housing sites. So a few key ones, really working to incentivize and engage affordable housing developers to encourage low and moderate income rental housing, engaging the agency that runs the Housing Choice Voucher Program to see if there's any opportunities for partnerships to expand the program, maybe we get some extra money, that kind of thing. ADUs, so incentivizing ADUs, coming up with a plan to do so as part of the comprehensive zoning code update, and to really put some incentives in the zoning code to encourage the development of ADUs. And again, when you do that, you can apply targeted actions, right? You can target certain areas if you really want ADUs in that area, right? I haven't defined that for you here. You can do as you feel on that. Home ownership, same thing. Going out and seeing if there's any extra funding out there and just regularly investigating whether there's funding out there and then going after it if there is, right? Preservation of existing affordable housing. This is a required program, actually. It just says if we have an affordable development that's deed restricted and that deed restriction expires, we're going to have to do some things. And one of those is letting tenants know what their rights are in that case. And the other one is engaging the property owner to see if there's any way to keep that deed restriction in place, right? Oftentimes there's some negotiating. Sometimes they just want to keep it anyway because they don't want to change to market rate. They're not going to renovate the whole building and reopen as market rate anyway. But just engaging them to explore opportunities to preserve that affordable housing. Housing rehabilitation, another one that's, you know, we understand that there's a high need for rehabilitation. We understand the cost of construction is really high. So what can we do to try to find some money to have a program that assists folks?
And just, again, not getting too far into the weeds, but yeah, there's a huge need for that in this county. And are you telling us that other jurisdictions are successfully finding money to go help homeowners rehabilitate their houses on a large scale?
Yeah, for lower income families, it's usually restricted to lower income folks. But the most obvious is like the weatherization programs that help seniors put dual pane windows in their house and do those kind of things. Those are usually like an energy efficiency upgrade, you know, and so there's some more money in doing those things. But there is some money out there. Also, some jurisdictions find it in their general fund or fundraise in some other way to start a program to help local.
Well, that's probably what we'll do.
Do that next year.
But okay, thank you. I mean,
Out
that's
of
just
that.
interesting. I mean, 'cause as you said, there's a huge need for that. I mean, I see some of the places that we used to go in the fire department and you just think, oh my gosh, how do people live here like this? And yet, where would they get the money to do that? And so to understand that if we do the right research and have the right resources to put toward it, we might be able to find funding to help people in those situations.
Correct.
Okay.
And with natural disasters, you know, there might be some ways to streamline the permit process to reduce some costs to rebuilding and all of that too. So
Well,
especially for
certainly,
fire, yep, that's going to be coming down the pike. I think that's policy is going to be good for that. We can talk about those.
Thank you.
And then a couple more on housing needs. These are actually programs that we came up with staff. So there's one, it's 23. So this is a program to update the zoning code to allow tiny homes where single family developments are allowed. Again, this is not required. This is something we heard in the comments from the public and we spoke about with staff. And then 24 would be allowing groups of 3 or more mobile tiny units as a permanent multifamily dwelling. In multifamily areas, public comment also came in that we might consider commercial areas as well. So those are not required by the state. Those are programs that just show that the county wants to improve access to housing and different types of housing opportunities. The next batch of programs really address households with special housing needs. So seniors, people with a disability, single parents, particularly female-headed households, single parents, farm workers, extremely low-income families. There's a number of categories that are all state-defined. So we have to have programs that address their needs. So Program 8 really works to provide incentives for development of senior housing, housing for folks with a disability, even employee housing would count there. Program 9 really tries to address working with providers and to really ensure that, we have some units that folks with a disability can access, right? To also just encourage accessible housing design as well, right? Program 11, extremely low-income households. So trying to find some additional incentives for the most affordable housing, right? And trying to work some of those incentives into the zoning code update as well. Same with employee and farm worker housing. You have to have a program for this. So this is just, again, finding incentives and ways that we can try to make it more feasible for developers, more attractive for developers to develop. Emergency housing, this is something that we had to address not only because of the needs, but also just because of constraints in the area. So engaging with regional partners to discuss opportunities to create more shelters and things like that. And then pursue grants, look for private contributions, again, trying to identify where funding may come from. And then if we find it, what are we going to do, right?
I have a question about the,
Sure.
this farm worker housing just brings up some questions. And I'm crossing again across things here, but dots connecting. We currently have a requirement for cannabis cultivation, commercial, that there has to be a residence of some sort. Now we're talking about housing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been debate about whether that should be or not should be, but is there anything, because that we're talking about housing right now, that we should be talking about that? Or is that just a completely separate thing that stays only within the cannabis ordinances?
As far as the state, I think, as an HCD is concerned, that's not the farm workers that they're trying to provide housing for. They're really talking about agricultural farm workers working on large farms and that
Okay.
kind of thing. I know
And
there's
we-
not a ton of
yeah.
that in the county.
And we have a little bit of that too, but not as much. So that, I'm glad we have this, because we do have a little bit of that. But that other thing just is outside the scope of this, and we just have to address that separately.
Yeah, you can address that how you want to address that
Okay.
without involving the state, if that
Okay.
helps.
And then I know this is focused on housing versus lodging. But am I right that in some ways with our various programs, we're using lodging facilities as housing? And is that in a manner in which needs to be addressed in this document?
If you're speaking to like, maybe there's an old motel that is now long-term housing, it's been, turned into SRO, single room occupancy kind of rooms. Those would count towards your housing goals because that's long-term housing, and all jurisdictions are actually required to allow and incentivize single room occupancy. So that is kind of touched here, if that's what you're speaking to.
I think it's more the voucher program that HRN and other entities provide vouchers for
Mhm.
short-term kind of emergency housing.
Yeah, so we do talk about housing choice vouchers in here.
Okay.
And there is a program for that to, again, call them regularly, figure out if there's more money. How can we expand the program? How can we expand how many landlords accept those vouchers, right? What engagement can we do with property owners to get more people willing to take those vouchers, right? Things like that.
Thank you.
I have a quick question on timing, if I could. Where we are a little bit late, and I'm not, it's a 2025 document, right? Starts,
Mhm.
am I correct? Okay. So efforts that have been made up until this point, even though we're adopting a bit late, can those boxes be checked retroactively to efforts that have been made?
Yeah, so when you put in your annual progress report next year to show what you did in 2025, that all of that work is counted towards this
Okay.
upcoming planning period. It's not, oh, you didn't pass it yet, so that only counts for the previous one. That doesn't exist.
Okay.
All right. Then we have another group of programs that are really geared at outreach or fair housing issues. Fair housing issues have to have outreach as part of them. So there's a lot of outreach going on here. So the first one is just housing services outreach. This is just to work with the Far Northern Regional Center to implement an outreach program, right? This is something that's required by the state. But so that's just an engagement, creating an engagement strategy for the county related to housing. Fire safety recommendations, right? So compiling useful information for folks and then engaging households to provide that information. So maybe it's information on home hardening. And you feel that that's really important and you want to get that out to everybody. So that may be, your strategy that year, getting at those kind of things. How can we help to work to address fire safety, but also the cost of insurance if we have a safer county, right? Fair housing outreach, this is required. This is just making sure that the information you're supposed to be giving out to property owners and tenants, things like that about their rights and responsibilities is on the website and is somewhere where people can find it. The Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Program, this program is kind of a catch-all for all the little actions that don't really fit under another larger program, but they're all fair housing driven. They're really driven by the fair housing analysis and finding issues. So we have a number of things as part of this. So support for that housing choice voucher program, right?
That's just, those vouchers are like overnight lodging, which is not long-term housing choice.
Oh, okay. Okay. So there's like an emergency housing voucher. Okay.
Well, Carol, there's different ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's not,
I think Rick's question with the lodging was.
No, I was also thinking of some
We
of
have-
these that are a little longer term.
we have people in lodging that have been in there for
Okay.
long term. So,
Long term.
Okay. So there's both.
yes.
Both.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things that we heard from the public was that there are some improvements that need to happen. Sidewalks in certain areas really need sidewalks, things like that. So we included that as part of the program. Encouraging daycare facilities, right? For single parents, if you're working single parent and your kid's in school or your kid's below school age, you're really constrained, right? So trying to encourage some daycare facilities and then providing translation services. This is something that the state actually requires that we increase. I know the state or the county makes it available. We just had to put it in writing that translation services will be made available related to housing issues. Outreach to impacted areas. This is a program that was in the previous housing element that we kept. This is if there's a development going in that's going to have a direct impact on the surrounding uses, the county needs to notify those folks, right? This would be if someone's trying to put in a industrial polluting use next to tribal land or something like that, right? That's what that program was intended to. So we kept that. And then the anti-displacement program. This is a fairly large program just in that it's long. We kind of touched on it before, but these programs are saying the county will, during the next 5 years, make a strategy to address displacement. That strategy will include encouraging more housing, right? A way to get rents down is to just have more housing, right? It will work to protect tenants, right? So giving that information, right, to tenants about their rights. And then the third being, blanking, sorry. Oh, and then the third being just preservation. How do we work against displacement by preserving the affordable housing we have now? And again, that's not me dictating what the county's going to do. It's just saying the county's going to do this in the next 5 years. Okay, so that is a high-level overview of the programs. Again, if you want to provide comments to us at any time, please do. The programs really are where we can make some changes and really dial some things in. So if you have other ideas, you can always send us comments. The review process from here is very, very long. So don't worry if you don't have that comment today. If it's a month, 2 months down the road, still send us that comment. Because we can dial in these actions if you have, you know, some input to provide.
What is our deadline submission date to the state?
So our first submission is due right away, basically. I haven't gotten to it in the presentation yet, but they have already actually reviewed it once. So we sent it in during the public review period just to get their initial thoughts on it. And they had some comments, not a ton of comments, which is actually really good. And we'll get to those. But yeah, we need to submit the first official draft basically after this meeting. They get 90 days to review that. They send it back to you with comments. You get time to address those, but then you have to take it through adoption hearings or send it back in to review, and there's another 60-day review period. So there's like 8 months of state review coming up. It's very long.
But with all of that review, how would it be feasible that we would still be making changes on our end? You would think you'd have to lock in what you're submitting and then they
No,
respond.
Yeah, that's another great question. The review period is actually, it's a big back and forth with me and staff. They have questions, they bring them to you in the review period. A recent project I had, that first review period was 90 days. We actually did 7 separate reviews in that 90 days because the state had time to give me that information. And every 2 weeks, they were throwing me back comments and then we were making revisions. So there is all kinds of opportunities to make changes. Even after they approve it, we can make changes as long as we're not cutting big things that they liked, right? We can always add in things and dial them in as you see fit. This is your document. Even during the planning period, I have multiple clients who have come and said, hey, we want to revise our housing element because this came up or that came up. Right. And then they have me work with HCD and say, here's our suggested revisions. Do that back and forth again. So we can always dial it in to make it better. That's not a problem, all the way through adoption. Often at adoption hearings, even then we get yeah, we'll adopt it, but make these changes, right? And so there are even changes that happen after adoption. So it is a very fluid process for the next 8 months. And we are allowed to dial this in as we see fit, as long as we're not removing the things that the state says have to be there. We can make changes and edits.
Have roads been any part of this discussion about economic development at all? Just a question because that's, a big constraint.
Yeah, so we had a discussion a few weeks ago about, 4290 standards and those being a constraint. In the next draft, we may include a program to identify where that is the biggest issue or where it's the biggest constraint to housing, and then coming up with, okay, well, how can the county start to work to overcome that constraint? What can the county do? It'll be a program that won't be me deciding it for you right now. It'll be me identifying it as a constraint and saying the county's going to make a strategy to start addressing these constraints.
Jill, to your question about timing, so back in December, HCD sent me a nice little love letter that asked for, why we're late and what's our timing and when are we going to submit these things. Through staff and with Ryan's assistance, we provided a plan based upon certain milestones. Because of the power outage, and weren't able to submit, a couple of weeks ago, we are behind. They have sent me an email as late as last week asking why we're behind and when we're going to get it, when's the official submission. So they are tracking this and they are interested in what our status is. So Ryan's right. As when we're done with this, we do plan on submitting it, and then we'll keep working comments.
So the next kind of 2 sections I wanted to go through, if we have time, if that's okay, were just what we heard from the public. I think that's pretty important to talk about. And then if we have time, what we heard from the state so far. So if we could jump back to the PowerPoint. So public comments, we got over 50 comments from the public. Let's see if this is on again.
go off on you.
Yeah, it stopped working.
Open it back up again.
Any comments?
Board or anyone looking, that these documents are on the backup to the staff report, and the public comments start on page 11 of 65 of the full board packet. The HCD comments are first, and then the public comments are second.
So we'll start with the public comments.
What page, Trent?
11?
Page 11.
7, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so we had the draft out for
Right, this stuff.
the minimum requirement is 30 days. I think we actually had it out for almost 2 months, available for public review. We did get a number of comments. And we let people know they can comment through, the planning division, through the project website. We provide an email contact, phone number. They could write a letter in if they wanted to. We try to make it easy for people to provide comments. Generally, the comments kind of fell into a few buckets, so I was going to go over some of those. So first of all, we had a number of comments that expressed concern over proposed redesignation of low-density residential parcels to medium density, right? There were a number of people who wrote in a letter and said, hey, on that map, it says now my neighbor's parcel is medium density. I don't really feel like that's appropriate in this area, right? So there were a number of those comments that we received. We, of course, took in all those comments and documented them. I will say, however, that the housing element is not the tool that is proposing those redesignations, right? Those are redesignations that people saw through the housing element that are just a reflection of what's happening with the general plan land use map and changes to the general plan land use map. So the housing element isn't requiring us to do any upzoning or redesignation, right? So just to make that clear, the housing element is not pushing any rezones or redesignation. None of it, it's not required. We do talk about what the general plan land use map is trying to do and the changes that might occur from that. But the housing element, just so to be very, very clear, the housing element or the state are not telling us we have to rezone at all. So those comments are all very, very valid. Of course, anytime there's a planned rezoning or redesignation, you want to think about, is that appropriate for the surrounding uses, right? And so those comments are very valid. They need to be considered in the general plan land use map changes, and they are being considered as part of that. So we're taking in, as you probably know, the general plan land use map was up and people could comment on whatever parcel they wanted, and we got a ton of comments. So those comments just need to go in with those and be considered in the adoption of the general plan land use element and the map, basically. Those are very valid comments, and of course, we want to look for areas where, maybe the map, we bumped it up to medium density, and it's incongruent, right? So we definitely want to study those, and we will take all of those comments very, very seriously. They just don't change the housing element at all, if that makes sense. The next round of comments, kind of batch that we got, were people just concerned with rental costs, right? Rental costs in the county and in the whole state are really high. So we will have to respond to this comment and try to beef up some of our programs. I've got a response here that the housing element should be revised to incorporate additional data. A couple of the comments were saying that our rental cost data didn't go back far enough. We had just done a point in time, here's what's available right now, and just kind of documented it. So we'll expand the analysis behind that. And then we'll strengthen the programs. And then finally, the third bullet here goes to something we've discussed already. The county should consider a ban or a limit on short-term rentals, second home, vacation homes, that kind of thing. I haven't written that specifically in, as you will do that, because of course that is your decision to make. But the county should consider, based on these comments that we heard, doing so or having a strategy related to short-term rentals. The next group were on infrastructure improvements. So we got a number of comments that were just talking about, hey, there's apartments here and the crosswalks are insufficient. We don't have safe infrastructure, sidewalk infrastructure, right? And a few of the comments pointed out specific areas. So there's some multifamily areas in Weaverville, as well as in Hayfork, where people have said, hey, we really need a sidewalk here. So our response, because we had those comments and we do have to respond, we should strengthen those kind of what HCD calls place-based strategies, those geographically targeted actions, right? So we need to beef those up to address the issues that people raised, right? So trying to find maybe an infrastructure grant to do safe routes to school in that area or something like that. And then mobile homes. So we had a number of comments encouraging the county to encourage and allow for mobile homes. I put here several comments expressed an interest in encouraging mobile homes and parks, as well as RVs, as a way to expand affordable housing options. Those are among some of the most affordable. So the housing element should respond to these by trying to strengthen what actions we do have. And then the county could consider incorporating mobile homes and parks into those two programs that I mentioned about tiny homes, right? So some of the commenters were like, hey, if we're encouraging tiny homes on a single family lot, we're going to allow for that. Why shouldn't we also encourage a mobile home there? Or, if we're encouraging a group of tiny homes as like a little community, why can't we have a mobile home park there as well? So the county should consider that. And then finally, there was a comment that said that having like RV parks in commercial areas was a suggestion that they had. So the county should consider that as well. And that doesn't have to be decided as part of the housing element, but it was a comment and the county should consider it.
So Ryan, just a question, because you've got a couple of things here where your response includes the housing element should be revised too, like in this case, strengthen and expand actions, so on and so forth. So where are we in that? You've already made those changes?
Yeah, so
if we want you to make those changes?
I'm working on drafting those changes
Okay.
right now as my first suggestions for how to strengthen those programs. I don't leave it on staff to come up with those kind of things. I draft the programs and then there's a back and forth with staff. On the items that I've used, very specific wording the county should consider, those would be things that we could talk about. Does the county want to encourage mobile homes on single family parcels? They already have to be allowed by state law, but is that something we want to encourage, right? Do we want to allow for small RV parks on a commercial parcel, right? Those don't have to be decided today because those are zoning questions that can be incorporated in the zoning code update. Well, they'll need to be, but they don't need to be decided as part of the housing element. We can say the county is considering this as part of the upcoming zoning code update. So I'd love to take any thoughts that you have today,
Before we
but
do
obviously
that-
I've just raised this, so you may not have that many thoughts yet.
Well, and I
Can we
just want,
take a break real quick?
Sure. Sorry.
I asked, I didn't realize I was going to get an immediate response. Way to work.
5-minute break?
Yeah.
What are we doing?
5.
He's coming. I
Okay.
can see his hair
He's
through
in
the
the
window.
restroom and then he's got wrangled by somebody.
There he goes.
All right, it is 1:15 and we will restart the meeting.
All right, so jumping back into kind of the last few groupings of public comments, got two here. So the first, we've received several comments that encourage the county to support redevelopment. So there were a number of comments that said, hey, this location would be great if it was redeveloped for this or that. This has been vacant for a long time and there's just a structure there. We think it'd be great for housing. There were a number of comments. We didn't actually include a program geared towards redevelopment of large scale apartment complex and things. It was more rehabilitation for individual single family homes. So the commenters encouraged us to include something that addresses rehabilitation of old commercial uses, things like that. And to just come up with a program that would commit the county to creating a strategy for those.
I just want to mention something. I have no idea if it should be accounted for in this program or not, but I mentioned at the board meeting earlier today that the Community Development Organization nonprofit has recently filed for a a grant, $50,000 grant to come up with a plan and implementation requirements for revitalization of downtown Weaverville, which includes some housing and connected communities with trails and so on and so forth. So I don't know if the fact that that application has been submitted on behalf of the county by a nonprofit is of value and should be reflected in anything here, but I'm just mentioning it in case so you know.
Certainly. Could you, any information you have on that, provide that to staff and we'll see if there's an opportunity to work that in. We definitely want to get credit for what's already happening in the county, right?
Okay.
We don't want to just sign you up for a bunch of new stuff as well.
Right, and before you go on, if I could, is a little housekeeping piece. I thought I understood you to say that the first part of the comments came from HCD and that subsequent to that were comments that came from the public. But what I'm reading here on page 1, I could almost tell you who.
So there's two sets of comments in table form that I provided. One is from HCD and one is the public comments. So
Okay.
you may just be looking at the HCD. I'm not sure what order they put them in the staff report.
HCD was the first in the staff report and then the public comment was second.
Right, which is what correct. Okay, so I just need to look.
HCD comments.
Okay, thank you.
And then we also got, and this is something we can talk about today, we got a number of comments, and I will say almost every jurisdiction I work with gets these comments, just encouraging the county to adopt smoke-free housing policies, right? There's several organizations that this is their jam, and they like to submit letters, just encouraging jurisdictions to think about restricting smoking in multifamily buildings, right? So they had a couple of policy suggestions that we can talk about here. I've got them up on the slide. So the first suggested policy to consider is a healthy multi-unit housing policy. This would be to promote the adoption of smoke-free policies for new and existing housing developments in order to limit residents' exposure to harmful effects of secondhand and thirdhand smoke. The second suggestion that they had was a healthy assisted living facilities policy. That would be to consider adopting an ordinance or policy that prohibits smoking and vaping on all county-owned or operated housing campuses and facilities, right? These were their two suggestions, and I would love to take any thoughts or comments you have on whether or not that's something that you feel would work well for Trinity County.
I think the second is in progress. If I'm correct, that there are local entities seeking the second.
It's not moving forward at the moment, but you are correct.
So
And that's more of a business focus though.
Well, it is
It's
business, but
private
also
housing.
had some, I believe it's county-owned properties, correct?
Right,
Yeah.
but this is more of a,
These suggestions were geared towards,
Housing.
you know, where you have multi-units, right? So a duplex or an
Not
apartment
county-owned.
building.
private house,
Housing
privately
is
owned.
Specific.
Yeah.
Yeah. This, I think, is along the same lines,
Mm-hmm.
but even much more in detail and trying to be much more restrictive than what
Mhm.
Agreed.
I've seen before.
Thank you.
And of course, we don't have to make a decision on this. If you have comments, I'll take them, but also we could include a program that explores this in the upcoming planning period, like many of our programs. You know, during the next 5 years, the county will consider this and hold a public meeting to talk about it. That kind of program also works very well as a response to this and bring it back to the public and make it a discussion rather than a quick decision.
I like it.
You like that?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So that was, the flavor of the public comments. We had a few extras that were just one-offs, but they're all responded to in your staff reports. Those are the ones we really needed to talk about today. In addition to putting the draft out for public review, we also contacted HCD. Their review times can take a long time. So anytime you can get some extra feedback helps you jump the line a little bit. So we contacted them and they said, yeah, we'd love to give you our initial thoughts on it before you even submit, so that you know the changes you're going to have to make right away anyway. So we did submit it to them. They had a number of comments. They were fairly informally written, just, hey, consider expanding this, consider expanding that. They are included there as well. You can see the ones that are absolute requirements based on their language. But we will have to make some adjustments. When we wrote the draft, we were trying really hard to check all the state's boxes, make a unique plan, but also not overburden the county with so much implementation. So we didn't throw everything into the draft. They are requesting some additional things be added to it. And that is always the case with HCD. No matter what you submit, they will have comments and they will ask for more no matter what. So that's why it's good not to give them everything right up front, because you'll get expanded really far. So, but having them give us their feedback really skips a round of review later on that can be very timely. So based on their comments, we're going to have to do some things, and it's mostly either revise or strengthen programs to do these things. So they really feel that multilingual engagement is something that the county needs to commit to, particularly with translation to Hmong as well, not just English and Spanish, I think was their comment. So they asked us to write that into the programs as much as we can. Wherever there's engagement, just say we'll make an option for translation if folks need it, right? They wanted us to address displacement due to fire or natural disaster, or to strengthen those. We had some program actions in there to address that. We're going to have to write a few more. We'll have to get creative with what we can do there. Obviously, there's not a ton that the county can do to address the cost of fire insurance, right? But there are some things. Compliance with the Permit Streamlining Act. This is just a state law compliance thing. They want us to write in to the document that you will comply with state requirements for processing an application, those type of things. They wanted us to address disparities in broadband access and broadband/cell phone service access to try to start to address some of the areas where there are deficiencies in service. As far as, what we're going to do for that, it will be the county will have to create a strategy for engaging the service providers to see what their plans are and if they have any.
That exists.
Okay.
That work has been done through RCRC when broadband was looked at. And so we have our contacts. I'm sure I probably have those maps sitting right on my laptop.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. So we'll want to incorporate that's already happening into a program that we write to meet those requirements. Just to show HCD that this is happening in the community. They care about broadband access and they're taking actions towards that, rather than me write a bunch of new actions that you have to do. So definitely I'll work with staff to get information about that.
And I'll just add in on there, I recently shared something with staff that I was on a call about digital awareness and equity, and there was reimbursed funding available for for communication outreach to people about reduced cost services and so forth. So
Okay.
and they've already drafted materials. They'll provide them in Hmong and other languages for us, all that kind of stuff. We pay for it, we get reimbursed.
Cool.
And it can be text, it can be print, it can be all these sorts of things. So just again, if that's helpful for you to know that that's available to us, and we have to obviously act on it, and that funding was a first come, first serve, but I'll at least just
Absolutely.
mention it.
That's great.
Nice.
Yeah.
Can I also ask about the Permit Streamlining Act? I know this, I brought this up before when we were in the general plan work, and my initial hope was that when we talked about streamlining, it was going to be across all aspects of how we do business that has anything to do with zoning and so on and so forth. And I was disappointed to learn, no, we're really just helping you with this part. And so I don't know if this section, when we talk about the Permit Streamlining Act, is that act only focused on the things that the general plan work is helping us with, or is it broader? And this is committing us, I mean, I get we got to do it, but I'm just saying, is this broader and not covered by what's being supported by our general plan consultants?
I could actually answer that. So this is a very specific thing. It's like 2 paragraphs of state law that say, if you receive an application, you'll review it within this amount of time and you'll do this, that, and the other, right?
Okay.
And so it's just
Very
a
high level.
matter of taking that state code language, putting it in the housing element and saying, we're going to put this in our zoning code. So that would be something that'd be very easy to include in the zoning code update, because it's just finding a spot for it and putting it in. It's a state law requirement, very specific to CEQA, how long you're going to process a CEQA application.
I would just add, because they commented on that, I think, because I put realistic timeframes into what we are able to actually do for specific permit types, which does not largely comply with the 30-day turnaround for every single application type, then the 10-day return period from the NOI, and then the 10-day from that. And then it depends on the specific type of project. Like cell towers have an even more strict timeline than the normal permits for Permit Streamlining Act. So I think that's why they flagged it. So we're just gonna have to say we can do it.
Well, and I would say
Whether we can or not.
there's a gentleman from the Bay Area who writes this letter on every draft housing element. It's the same exact letter. I could probably tell you his name off the top of my head because he did it with everyone. And it just says, this is state law. Make sure they put it in their housing element.
Okay.
And so he actually sends the letters to HCD, doesn't send them to the county. So HCD said, we got this letter. You have to address it anyway. It's part of state law. So it is just putting this bit in the code.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
If you had the Acela software, would that, well, it probably wouldn't solve the problem, but it would at least track it better for you?
And it would help solve it actually from my exposure.
It's not gonna give me more people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, would it track it better? Yes. Would we know where the status is of it? Yes. Like Bella said, it's not going to give us more people to review them and do the actual actions associated with a project from a planning perspective.
Yeah.
But I mean, over time, it's going to help us understand, where they are in the process, and there's more coordination, less admin of how we send stuff out right now for review internally and that kind of stuff.
So from that standpoint, increased efficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
So I wanted to maybe ask a question about the disaster-driven displacement, because I noticed that they wanted you to do further analysis. And so, curious how you're going to do that. Like, I guess my question is pretty specific. During the Helena fire, we lost 72 homes. the bulk of those were Bigfoot campground. So it was a mobile home park that got burned through and has never been rebuilt. So, I mean, and then I guess HE 22 is supposed to address displacement. So how, can you give us a little bit more detail on how you're going to encourage things like rebuilding a mobile home park that serves a lot of low-income people, or, you know, how are you going to address all the people that get burned out, you know, in a fire?
Unfortunately, you know, the housing element it can't really address that, right? Like we can put some programs in place for having a strategy for starting to address some of those things. You know, they're asking for like they're asking us to address disparities in fire risk for seniors and persons with a disability, right? That's another, okay, how do we even start to deal with that? So,
Well, I mean, like Coffee Creek, you know, 200 structures burned. Okay, so the bulk of those people, you know, we're trying to rebuild. So how does the county encourage them to rebuild?
Carol,
with
there
the
are things the county
permitting?
could do, like in a large disaster area like that, if the county wanted to waive fees for permit applications. That would be something the county has control over to encourage somebody to rebuild there, which would then put that particular home back on the tax rolls, where we would then get more, you know, tax back from it, revenue back from it. The idea is, you know, those fees we would waive potentially for a permit over time, we would collect that back, so your return on investment would be there. The county has done that before. It just depends upon the very specific disaster, how many structures were involved, you know. But as far as like what the county can do to incentivize a private landowner to rebuild a RV park is realistically nothing. I mean, we're not going to incentivize them other than, you know, we can help with some fees and we can help commit to, you know, streamlining their permits. But beyond that, I mean, there's private equity that needs to come in and provide that rebuild effort.
Okay, that makes perfect sense for something like the RV park. For something like someone rebuilding their home, does the county have the option to have lesser building standards, you know, to go back to the original or earlier building standards, or do they have to meet the current ones?
There's some potential there depending upon how fast somebody would rebuild, what they were doing, and if they stayed like within the existing, you know, current confines of what their house was, their existing footprint. That there's some constraints for that that allow that to happen. But you know, can somebody just go back in and rebuild a new house, you know, at multiple hundreds of square foot more and a whole different configuration to old building code? No.
So in HE 22, I mean, are there anti-displacement standards or programs specifically for wildfire, kind of people losing their homes there?
So we could include some actions if you know, we talk with staff and there's some ideas for how to do that. As a reminder, that program is just saying we're gonna do this and here's kind of a menu of options. You can expand that menu as far as you want when you go to do it. You could, you know, I always use the language, it may include, but is not limited to, so that you can have these conversations with the public, figure out what's really needed, and then make that strategy based on what is really unique to the county.
I would just add a couple things from what I'm hearing. The RV park is largely regulated by HCD. We don't really have much permit authority over those, so that would, you know, involve HCD streamlining efforts. And then as far as the disaster relief, one thing that just comes to my mind, and we could totally workshop this internally, is to set some type of goal to coordinate with other jurisdictions that have done this before, right? So I've talked to like the director of the city of Paradise, right? Like they understand what needs to happen after a disaster because they've been dealing with it for a very long time. And they have various programs that they've put in place for homeowners to kind of help incentivize home hardening, because they do have to comply with the updated regulations, but maybe there's some type of programs that we could help them with or whatever. And that's really broad, right? So, but it's coordinate with other jurisdictions. It's
As
just one
part of
thing to think
creating your
of.
strategy.
Yeah.
Right? To make an informed strategy. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I lost so many friends in Coffee Creek and the Helena fire, and they moved out of the county, so I'm trying to figure out how we can avoid that in the future, you know?
Yeah, I mean, certainly streamlining rebuilding efforts, if you don't already do that, at least providing some, the streamlining that you can for the permitting, things like that.
One of the other things that we have allowed in the past, August Complex was a good example of allowing RV DUPs in a time frame of 2 years so that the homeowners could rebuild their home, but they could live in that RV while their home was being rebuilt. We have done that in the past
Yeah.
through our urgency ordinance.
Okay, yeah, and that's something that would definitely apply here. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think our biggest hurdle here is when we have like a Helena or Paradise, we just don't have the amount of carpenters, finished people to do the work here. We burned down 20 houses here. We got 7 carpenters. We're not getting the job done quick.
Well, the other issue, like for the Helena fire, HRN provided all the trailers. The Lions and the Rotary Club raised the money. They bought all the big RVs, and then they didn't have any place to put the RVs to
Yeah.
provide the temporary housing. So maybe we could look at, are there places where we could have that, that housing, somewhere scattered around the county? What would be the options?
And that,
sounds like a really good topic for the planning commission to take up.
Yes,
Yeah.
Multi-agency type things with environmental health, with septics, and there's a lot of stuff we can do. August Complex was huge, and they lost a lot of single-family homes.
Yeah.
So building permit costs is what I hear, assessments, those types of things that really hurt, to rebuild.
Yeah.
People won't come back if they can't afford it, and we don't get taxes. So.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and all of those actions could be something that you could implement through the emergency housing / emergency shelter program that's included here. Those could be part of your strategy for addressing that. Certainly.
So we'll talk about it, but I just find it so interesting how the city of Paradise came back, and largely their efforts were fueled by PG&E and Aaron Rodgers. So that's very lucky of them, and also not lucky, but maybe to reach out to other nonprofit or philanthropic groups would be something to add into there.
Yeah, seeking private contributions.
Mhm.
Sure. Okay. Please take that note for me.
Yes.
Here. And then just a few more, again, they wanted us to strengthen anything related to fire risk and fire safety, just to address all the comments that we received about the high cost of insurance. They wanted us to actually address energy conservation. It's something that's required by state law. And so they just want to see a program exploring that. Something like incorporating energy conservation into the rehabilitation program, right? So weatherizing houses, things like that would fall into that requirement.
So in the vein of the things of taking credit for things we've already done, it might be possible to take credit for the fact that we've already done a survey of our population about the impacts of insurance costs going up. And so we
Okay.
have pretty robust data. And then I don't participate in the Fire Safe Council because I'm not appointed, but I do believe they were then doing follow-up to say, what should they do and what would they like us to do to support those efforts, in terms of trying to pursue changes in policy, but also Fire Safe Council was looking at what can they do to help education, because what we found were things like people knew about defensible space, but not home hardening
Okay.
and things of that nature. So I just, again, if there's things that we want to put in here because, hey, we can always take credit for it, those are some things on the radar.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that information.
Mhm.
Because we will do so. A few additional things they just commented on were they wanted to see a little bit more targeted community revitalization efforts. We talked about the comments that we received on sidewalks. It's perfect. We'll include an action related to that and beef that up a little bit. And then supporting implementation of housing element programs. This is what we talked about before. They realize that you're constrained, but they also want to push you as hard as they can to get you to implement your housing element. So they would like to see a program. Usually these programs say, you know, we understand there are constraints, but we're going to try really hard. If halfway through the planning period, we're not able to implement these, maybe we'll revise some of our actions to be a little more implementable, right? That's just a requirement of HCD that you put that in there. That's actually really easy to do for jurisdictions that have an 8-year housing element cycle, because halfway through, 4 years in, you do an evaluation. It's a little harder in this case, just because it's a 5-year planning period. So it's like by the time this is adopted, a year will go by and then you'll be evaluating it again. So you just need to have a conversation. It can be a staff level conversation. It doesn't have to involve the board, but just having a conversation, how are we doing? And then reporting that as part of your annual progress report to HCD. Hey, halfway through, here's our midterm evaluation. We're doing okay. We struggled here. We had successes here, that sort of thing.
And just so I'm clear too, does staff just handle that? Or do you have to come back to the board to get us to bless what you're going to respond? I don't remember seeing things on this before, so I don't know.
Well, in my opinion, we should bring it back to the board if we're going to make any, substantial changes in any of it. So, yeah, if I'm sitting in the seat, I'm not going to do it on my own. I'm definitely going to bring it to somebody's attention.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
the deciding factor there obviously is if it's written in specifically in the housing element that you are going to do this, if you want to revise that, you do have to actually re-adopt the document. Where I've put in a program that says you're going to make a strategy, it might include these things and it might not. Here's a menu. I use that language to give you the flexibility to work with staff and not have to reopen your whole housing element. Because once you actually adopt it and it's certified, if you decide I want to change this line, you have to actually resubmit it to HCD and it reopens the whole thing. So they don't just read the line you changed, they redo their whole review. So having those programs that have flexibility built into them, I find is really helpful for you all. You can make those decisions based on what you want to have to do and not have to open up your housing element again. My other approach with responding to these comments from HCD that you'll see in the next round, in the next draft, is I'm trying to connect what they're asking for with what we're already doing in the other general plan elements. So where the safety element had something that was addressing fire risk, I brought it in. And I'm going to say, in coordination with safety program, blah, here's what we're going to do, right? And that will be an effort to beef up our programs, show HCD we're doing all the things they want us to do without having to create whole new actions that might be in conflict with what you're doing elsewhere. So that's my other approach at this point. The next draft is a draft for HCD. We make it public. You can read it. You can provide comments on it. But we do have to work with staff to come up with the revisions that we think are going to get you to certification. So that's kind of my approach, so that it's not wholly new for you either. So if there aren't any more questions on programs, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about programs. Really, the implementation is really what you're going to be dealing with for the next 5 years. So we wanted to focus on that. Let me see if this works. I can talk quickly about what's up and coming. So we did the public review. We took comments. We're taking your comments. And as I've said, we'll work with staff to draft the revisions to suggest to HCD. We actually have to take 10 business days. Like you have to, HCD makes you do that just to show that you're actually incorporating it. We've already started this. We won't need the full 10 days, but we have to take it. But after that, then we submit to HCD. It's just an email submittal and it's their first round of review. They get 90 days to do it. They are seemingly pretty available right now. During the other housing, the sixth cycle and the Bay Area is going on, they were very busy and they could not get back to you. Right now, you can get their ear with an email. So I expect us to be going back and forth through that 90 days on multiple rounds of review. As I said, I had another project that actually got certified after that one round of review, which is, I think, only 2 jurisdictions in all of California have achieved that. I would love for that to happen here, because then the next time I meet with you, you'll know HCD is good with this. This is it. We can add to it, but as long as we don't remove anything that they loved, this is it. Otherwise, if they have, at the end of that 90 days, if they have a bunch of comments, we will have to make revisions, bring them back to you to at least talk about them. You can adopt at that point, or you can wait until you get a clean letter from HCD and then adopt. It's actually what I suggest, so you don't have to re-adopt multiple times. It's just annoying and it takes your time. So, we'll address their comments, resubmit, get a clean letter, and then bring it back to you for adoption. But all through that time, we need to be communicating with you so you know what the revisions are. We will be sending out every time we do any revisions. We have to post it on the project website, send it out through the email list so that everybody knows, hey, this is what we're working with. This is public review and we want your comments on it. So we have to take comments from the public all the way through adoption. Even at the adoption hearing, if we get public comments, we have to document them in the housing element and say how we responded to them. So it is okay to send in your comments at any point in time. We will always value them.
And speaking of the public comment point, I see we have 15 people online. Should we be taking public comment in this setting right now as we've covered this or not?
Can, yeah, I think it's worthwhile to see if there's any public
All right.
comment on anything today.
We don't have any in the room. Is there any on Zoom?
Ben?
Good afternoon. This has been really informative. My head's spinning and I'm probably going to take some ibuprofen afterwards. It's a lot of info. Just wanted to thank Cody and Bella for taking this from seems like a 30,000 foot view down to something more manageable. Funding is definitely going to be a hindrance for us. Just looking at doing a little Googling and reading over the last week in prep for this, the CFCC, which is the California Financing Coordinating Committee, seems to be a good place to start when we're talking about expansion of water distribution and other things like the CRWA, the RCAC, other 4-letter alphabet groups. I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir when I'm sure you guys know about all this already, but this is definitely a good place to start, and hopefully we're already interacting with these groups. I did have a comment or a question regarding, there is a comment made by, I think it was Supervisor Cox last year, that she had been in talks, initial or whatever they were, with developers, wondering what came out of those, any information gleaned from them, any information that she can share with everyone, because we are going to have to get a developer up here that's going to want to build. It's not going to be realistically probably anyone within the county. We're going to have to get someone up from SAC or the Bay Area once this is all figured out. Thank you.
Any others? No?
I don't think I can I?
Any more on Zoom?
No new raised hands.
Carol, in-house?
Well, just briefly, so I read the document and just want to compliment you and the staff. I mean, it's very data dense. It's very thorough. I mean, I thought you did a great job. And so if I'm picking on a couple little things, overall, I just really thought the document was well done. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else on Zoom? Any discussion?
Yeah, I just wanted to find out, because we did gloss over a couple of things where you were talking about whether it was HCD or public comments and your response and so forth. I just, we don't need to go back and rehash everything, but are there any things that you really wanted to make sure you had some clarity about whether the board and commission felt like we should or shouldn't pursue something at this point? I know there's plenty of time for more. I just wanted to make sure if
Yeah.
you need something from us, you get it from us.
So from my perspective, and Bill and Ed, please jump in, but from my perspective, I don't think we're not, I'm not looking for like specific programs to be cut right now. Is what I would ask the board and the planning commission to do is, as you have time to look through this document, as this is not, the first time that, or the last time that we're going to be able to make adjustments to it, is to, consider some type of prioritization. Because when we do go into, and, we have like 22, programs, that's a lot. I mean, we've talked about it at staff. I mean, we don't have the current staff to do that, but this is not a this year plan. This is a multi-year plan leading into the general plan, which is, multiple decades, that kind of stuff. So we want to be realistic, but we want to make sure we have some good stretch goals out there, but also not set us up for things that aren't a priority of the board. And when we would come time for adoption, would get significant pushback or change or, a big redirection at that point. We don't want that. So that's what the ask would be is, to review this, have some time to look at it over the next, weeks, months, really. If there's some of those items that were like, no, this is just not going to work for me, and this is why, let's have that discussion. And we don't need this type of environment to do that. We can have that discussion, offline, one-on-one. We can work that in various venues.
Okay.
So that's kind of would be my ask.
And just for clarity, one of the examples that I had here was on page 55 of your, which was part of your presentation, was the part about the county should consider a ban or limit on short-term rentals by geographic area or countywide. And so I just didn't know, is that something today you'd like to know whether that should be continued, or that's out there, we should think about it, we should get back to you, that can be part of the general plan, it doesn't need to be here? That's what I'm trying to get clarity on.
More than welcome to have comment on that today. Is it absolutely needed? No, but I mean,
Okay.
we've talked about that before. There's various items regarding short-term rentals that, like the tax collectors working certain things for Airbnb and VRBO that's affecting not just us, it's affecting the 58 counties. And there's some current actions, I would say, within those two communities as far as what jurisdictions such as ours are not getting from them. There's some other items that we could set up, locally as far as ordinances, if we want to further restrict or confine the way we want to address short-term rentals. But if you've got some ideas, certainly share them so we could all hear them. But if not, we can that later.
No, I'm not prepared to jump in and dive into that. I think there's a lot of things we could look at here in terms of the whole problem that we talked about. I think I'm most familiar with what I hear from the North Lake area, as Carol was highlighting some of the examples, but I think that deserves more discussion than what we'll get to today.
Right.
I do want to just say that at some point, well, one, like I heard, I appreciate all the great work that went into this, and especially it's encouraging to hear that the people who actually will live with this document feel like it's a huge step forward from where we've been in the past, which is that's great to hear. I think for this to become something that we turn from what we must do to what we can and should do to address our real challenges here, that's going to take a whole lot more attention and work. And so at some point, if, the staff needs some help from board, as in like an ad hoc or something, I always, worry when you say that, because it's like, are we just getting in your way and slowing you down? Or is it a chance for you to get a sense of engagement with board members who might have to approve funding or priorities or something? But I just think it's a big enough thing that we should be available to you as you need us and not get in your way if you don't.
I agree.
But thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? No? Good.
Maybe one little comment about that, about short-term rentals. I think I'd like to see incentives instead of punishments for that.
Okay.
But that's just a comment, just an opinion. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I am good. Just the whole short-term rental thing was quite a topic at last RCRC annual meeting. I was just kind of reviewing some of the notes there. I have a conversation scheduled with Granicus I don't know, this week or the next to look. Looking for perspectives to be informed in future conversations because there are pros and cons on both sides of the coin. And for us to find where that really healthy, most profitable balance is for us is of interest. And so hopefully we can have some information to feed into an informed conversation for you shortly.
Great, great.
Thank you.
Are we adjourned?
We are adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.